Hello everyone and welcome to the third EurJOC virtual symposium. My name is Nijs and I'm the editor-in-chief of EurJOC, and I'm very excited that we're going into the third round here in our virtual symposia series today. This event is brought to you by Chemistry Europe, the society owners of EurJOC. We do have an amazing lineup today of 3 speakers, and to start we have Varinder Aggarwal from Bristol, followed by Tatiana Besset from Rouen and Josep Cornellà from the MPI in Mülheim. Again, our chair, Burkhard König, will moderate the scientific question and answer session, and he's supported by our deputy editor, Charlotte Gers-Panther. We have switched to a new platform today, but this one has similar functions. So there's also an option available where you can post questions to all of our speakers. And here we would like to ask you to tag the speakers. So please say @Varinder, @Tatiana, and @Josep to help us identify the questions a bit more easily. For those of you that are active on Twitter, we would also love to hear from you. So if you have any comments or if you want to post a picture, please do so, and also use the hashtag EurJOC. There will be a recording of this event available, and we will put it on YouTube afterwards and also share the link with you as soon as possible on Twitter and also on our website. I would now like to start with the first speaker of the event, and that's Varinder Aggarwal. And Varinder, please also come on screen. So Varinder studied chemistry in Cambridge, and that's also where he received his PhD. And after that, he went for a postdoc to Columbia in New York. He then returned to the UK and took on several positions at the University in Bath and in Sheffield before he joined Bristol in 2000. And he has been there since and is full professor in chemistry. His research interests focus on there he is, hello. His research interests focus on stereoselective synthesis, mechanistic studies, and also total synthesis. But in particular, he's interested in organoboron chemistry, and that will also be the title of his talk today. EurJOC and Varinder have had a long connection over the years, because Varinder is organizing the Bristol synthesis meeting since the past 20 years, and we've attended many times. And the more so, I'm very happy that he's now presenting his work at our EurJOC virtual symposium. So Varinder, we very much look forward to your talk on assembly line synthesis. Please start. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. So first of all, thank you for your kind and generous introduction. And I want to thank the team at the European Journal of Organic Chemistry for inviting me to speak at this increasingly popular symposium. Now, as Anna said, I am from Bristol. And a few weeks ago, our city was in the news because during our first Black Lives Matter demonstration, the statue of Edward Colston, a slave trader come philanthropist, was taken down and dumped in the harbour. I was initially shocked at this act, but pleased that he has been removed from his pedestal and will now be displayed in a museum where his positive and negative aspects of his life can be told in full. So, from the Black Lives Matter campaign, let's switch to the less important field of organic synthesis, a field in which I work. Now, in organic synthesis, you start with a small molecule, a small building block, and then add another building block to it. And then, after functional group interconversion, we can add further building blocks until we reach a target compound. And we, like many other people around the world, are interested in how to go from a starting material into a final target molecule more effectively and more efficiently. And our idea to achieve this is to try and go directly from starting material to product in one pot, using and exploiting the beautiful chemistry of boron. Boronic esters are electrophilic. They have an empty orbital on boron, and so can be readily attacked by nucleophiles to give boron-8 complexes shown here. If that nucleophile also houses a leaving group attached to it, then the intermediate boron-8 complex can undergo 1,2 migration, expelling the leaving group and creating a new boronic ester. And that new boronic ester can be used again and again in an iterative manner until a target molecule is created. And the great beauty of this is that there aren't any intermediate steps that need to be done to go from one boronic ester iteratively to another. Now, in order to realize this overall vision, there are three components that need to be addressed. We need ways of introducing boron into the molecule, and then we have this growth phase where we carry out this iterative chemistry, and then we have a termination phase where the carbon-boron bond is converted into what we really want at the end. In this lecture, I'm going to focus on this central part, the growth phase and assembly line synthesis. Key to this growth phase is the nature of this reagent here. We need to think of a nucleophile, some sort of organometallic reagent that has a leaving group attached, that is chiral and configurationally stable. What kind of reagents fulfill all of those criteria at the same time? Well, we were attracted to the chemistry of Dieter Hopper. He showed that carbamates could be deprotonated with butyl lithium and in the presence of strong base form this intermediate lithiated carbamate, which could be trapped by electrophiles with high enantioselectivity. That intermediate lithiated carbamate looked to us like a chiral organometallic reagent with a leaving group attached. And so our idea was to take Hopper's lithiated carbamate, react it with a boron reagent, forming an intermediate boron-8 complex that would undergo 1,2 migration to give a new boronic ester. And indeed, this chemistry works well. Here it is again. Sorry, excuse me. Here it is again. And let me first of all show you the scope of this chemistry with respect to the carbamate. The carbamate can house a small substituent, that is where R is methyl, or all the way up to T-butyl. You can see that you get high yield and high enantioselectivity in these extreme cases. So it works for very small and very large groups and pretty much everything in between. It is limited in functionality though. It tolerates silyl ethers and alkenes, but because we use strong base, only a limited set of functional groups are tolerated. But the scope of the boronic ester is much broader. Of course, we can not only tolerate alkenes and silyl ethers, but we can also now include esters, azides, and nitriles. And this means that the boronic ester is actually more electrophilic than these other potential reactive functional groups. Now, when we have methodology, we like to apply it in synthesis. And to start off with, I just want to illustrate this methodology on a simple target molecule, and that is the insect pheromone Farinal. This is the structure of the target molecule, and this is the chemistry we're going to be using. So we started off with this allylic boronic ester, and we added this reagent once and then a second time to introduce the substituent here. And here's the mechanism of the chemistry that you've already seen before. And now from here to the end, we need to add a 2-carbon unit. And to do that, we elected to use this Zweifel olefination reaction. And in this Zweifel olefination reaction, you add vinyl lithium to a boronic ester, forms an intermediate boron-8 complex, which on treatment with iodine generates an intermediate iodonium ion that triggers 1,2 migration to give this beta iodoboronic ester. And then treatment with a nucleophile methanol. Methanol attacks boron and affects elimination to give the alkene. And now from here to the end is a simple case of hydroboration oxidation and further oxidation to lead to the target molecule farinal. But perhaps the most interesting aspect of this synthesis is that you can go from this allylic boronic ester to this alcohol in one pot simply by adding these reagents sequentially, one at a time, and by doing that we obtain the alcohol in 69% yield, 96:4 diastereoselectivity, and essentially complete enantioselectivity. Well, as I said, that's a relatively simple target molecule. What about something more complex? And we chose this molecule borlomycin because it had been recently been isolated from the labs of David Sherman, and it has interesting biological activity. We chose to disconnect the molecule roughly in the middle into two almost equal parts, so it becomes a convergent synthesis. And we envisaged a late stage lithiation borylation to connect the two fragments together. Fragment A contains this 1,2 bis boronic ester that can be made from the corresponding alkene through a diboration, and now this homoallylic alcohol can be disconnected back to the aldehyde and this allyl boron reagent. Fragment B, you'll notice that I've masked the ketone as an enol ether, because by doing so, we can disconnect this back to a boronic ester and think about using that Zweifel olefin reaction that I showed you earlier. This boronic ester can now be assembled from this boronic ester and these building blocks. So let's now have a look at this in the forward direction. I've made one change here, and that is instead of using carbamates, we're now using these triisopropyl benzoate esters that are abbreviated with TIB. These are slightly better leaving groups in this lithiation borylation chemistry, and so as molecules get more hindered, they give higher reactivity and so slightly higher selectivity as well. Furthermore, these reagents are derived from the corresponding stananes, which are crystalline, and so we can generate these in essentially enantiomeric purity, which means that we don't suffer from diastereomeric mixtures when we use them multiple times. So these are our two enantiomeric building blocks, and we also use chloromethyl lithium that's derived from the corresponding bromide or iodide. So these are the three building blocks I'm going to be using here, and I've color-coded the carbons so that you can see where they are in the building blocks and where they end up in the target molecule. So with that preamble, fasten your seatbelts as we launch our assembly line synthesis. This is our starting boronic ester, and we first of all come in with a blue reagent, and then one carbon homologation with the green reagent, chloromethyl lithium, and then the enantiomeric red reagent is used, chloromethyl lithium again, and finally the blue reagent. At this point, boron has done its job of facilitating this iterative reaction, and it's taken out of that process, and here we do our first purification, and we obtain this compound in 64% yield as a single diastereomer and single enantiomer. Our next step is to do this Zweifel olefination reaction. That's done with this lithiated enol ether, and that compound was obtained in 74% yield. From here to the end, we have to combine this reagent with fragment A. Fragment A contains two boronic esters. One is attached to a primary center, the other is attached to a secondary center. And in this chemistry, we see exquisite selectivity for the less hindered primary center. So we first lithiate our TIB ester with butyl lithium in the presence of -spartine, and then it's reacted with fragment A. And that reaction goes with high good yield and perfect diastereoselectivity for this newly created center. And now from here to the end, we simply have to hydrolyze this enol ether, remove the silyl ether, and hydrolyze the mom ethers. And that is all done in one step using aqueous HCl in THF methanol. And that completed our synthesis of baulamycin, 19% overall yield, and 10 steps, which was the longest linear sequence. So short synthesis with full diastereo control and full enantiomer control. We were quite happy with this synthesis, but when we compared the NMR of what we had made to the natural product, it didn't match. So we wanted to address this issue and ask the question of which of the 7 stereogenic centers had been misassigned. There are 128 different isomers of this compound, and we wanted to know what the real structure of baulamycin was. And this turned out to be quite a complicated story, and perhaps a more interesting story to the synthesis, because in the end, 5 of the 7 stereogenic centers had been misassigned. And what I want to do now is show you how we came to that conclusion. Here is the proposed structure of baulamycin. And like the synthesis, you can break down the molecule into 2 roughly equal parts because they're far enough apart that they barely speak to each other in terms of NMR. And let's look at fragment A first. When we looked at the coupling constant of H1, our observed coupling constant was 3.5 Hertz, whereas this natural product was 7 Hertz. That immediately told us that the stereochemistry there was almost certainly incorrect, and it was almost certainly anti rather than syn. That leads to 4 possible isomers for fragment A, shown here. And what we did is we calculated the NMR of each of these diastereomers. Now that's quite a complicated process because the molecule exists in multiple conformations, but we analyzed all the, 90% of the low energy conformations and computed what the proton-proton coupling constants as well as the NOEs of those computed structures would look like and compared them with the natural product. And that leads to a histogram of this sort. And here you're looking for the lowest possible numbers. In the dark areas, I've indicated the coupling constants. And you'll see that for the assigned structure, the proposed structure here in orange, you've got quite a low value, similar to the anti-anti-syn. But when you include the NOEs as well, then one structure comes out as the most likely structure for fragment A, and that is anti-anti-syn. So that was the structure that we targeted. And we made fragment A by the process shown here. We first of all carried out an alloboration reaction, shown here, using this phosphoric acid catalyst developed by John Antilla. That worked very well, high yield, high diastereo and enantiomer selectivity. We then carried out a hydroxy-directed diboration reaction. That was chemistry developed by Jim Morgan, and again, that worked very well with high diastereo selectivity. So in short order, we were able to make fragment A with high selectivity. That was then combined with fragment B and then deprotected as before to give us this compound. But once again, when we compared the NMR of what we had made with the natural product, it didn't match. However, this portion of the molecule matched essentially perfectly, but this portion of the molecule did not. So there was evidently a problem with this part of the molecule. And we could have done what we had done before and tried to calculate the NMR of this section as well. But we were looking for an even faster method to arrive at the structure of fragment B. A faster method where we could exploit the really high fidelity of our lithiation-borylation reactions. And let me show you how we did that. This is the boronic acid that we start with, and we carried out a lithiation-borylation of the sort you've already seen before, followed by 1-carbon homologation. Now, I don't know if you're multitasking, you may want to just pay attention for a minute here because it's going to get a little bit complicated. At this point, we came in with a mixture of the red and blue reagents in a ratio of 72-28. That gave us a mixture of diastereomers in a ratio of 72-28. And now when we look at the NMR and look at the simple integration of the NMR, that integral is now a signature of the stereochemistry of the molecule. So if we see 72, we know we have a syn relationship. And then we continued with the 1-carbon homologation and then came in with one further mixture of the blue and red reagents, which gave us a mixture of 4 diastereomers. The numbers in parentheses here in black are the calculated numbers we would expect from using this combination of reagents, this combination of mixture of reagents. And the numbers in red are what we measured. So we have got a mixture of 4 diastereomers in the ratios presented here. And by the way, these numbers are not chosen at random. The numbers are chosen to maximize the difference in integrations of the 4 diastereomers and to have a minimum of 10% of the smallest one so that we could actually see it by NMR. That mixture was then treated with fragment A and deprotected. And now one of those molecules should be borlomycin A. So now we're looking at methyl group 21. Here they are, and you can see the integrations presented below. And now we compare the NMR of that with the natural product. And we found that the one with the largest integral matched borlomycin A. And of course, we looked at other signals as well, but I'm just showing you C21. So this is the structure of borlomycin A. And now the proton NMR of our synthetic material at the top and the material from the natural product match perfectly. And these are the 5 stereogenic centers that had been misassigned in the original structure. This methodology that we have developed for introducing methyl groups in particular on carbon chains allows us to answer some fundamental questions about nature. Why did nature go to the trouble of introducing these methyl groups on carbon chains? Because when you look at natural products, they are full of molecules with methyl groups hanging off them. What is their role? I'm sure it's more than just to make life difficult for synthetic organic chemists. Well, in some very well argued review articles from Reinhard Hoffmann, he suggested that the role of these methyl groups is to control the overall shape of molecules, because these methyl groups want to avoid this destabilizing Syn-Pentane interaction, which costs about 3.5 kcals per mole. And by avoiding those destabilizing Syn-Pentane interactions, it forces the chain in certain orientations. So it controls the shape of molecules. And this is a nice example here from Dale Boger. This is an anti-cancer compound. And it's got a recognition site here for DNA and a warhead here, an alkylating agent. And they are connected together by this linker. But this linker turned out to be have a role as well, because if you remove one of the methyl groups, the activity reduced by almost 50-fold, because now the orientation of the warhead with the linker is not as well controlled. Now, these natural products have got many other functional groups that affect conformation. And we asked the question whether we could use methyl groups on their own to control the shape of molecules. Our analysis was that if we could make this molecule with an alternating syn-anti stereochemistry, this would adopt a linear conformation. Furthermore, if we could make this molecule with an all-syn conformation, this should adopt a helical conformation, again because the methyl groups want to avoid this destabilizing Syn-Pentane interaction. And we have the technology to be able to make these sorts of molecules. Let's start off with the alternating syn-anti. That was done by bringing in pairs of red reagents and then pairs of blue reagents. Each time we control stereochemistry, and each time we control chain length. This molecule was crystalline, and it turned out to have a beautiful linear structure. Here you can see the backbone with alternating methyl H running along that backbone. Beautiful linear structure. To make the helical structure, we needed to come in with alternating red and blue reagents. And these were introduced one at a time, each time controlling stereochemistry and each time controlling chain length. This molecule was not crystalline, but we oxidized the boronic ester to an alcohol and made a paranitrobenzoate derivative, which was crystalline. And here is its X-ray structure. And the green line shows the backbone with it winding its way around in this beautiful helical array orientation. And these methyl groups basically act like levers, pushing and pulling the carbon chain to avoid destabilizing Syn-Pentane interactions. But there is a final twist to this story, if you pardon the pun, because helical structures can be right or left-handed. And the structure that we made was a right-handed p helix. And you can imagine that if you made the enantiomeric compound, that would adopt an n helix. But our biggest surprise was that helicity is actually controlled by chain length. So as you go and increase the carbon chain length from 6 to 7 and so on, it alternates between P, uncontrolled for the odd numbered carbons, and M to 8, and P again to 10. Well, I almost fell off my seat when I saw this data unfold. The way we understand it is that the helicity is controlled, or a way of explaining it is that the helicity is controlled by the N groups. The way we make the molecules, we end up with R stereochemistry for 6 and 10. And those N groups control the helicity. For 8, we end up with S. And now you can see what happens with the odd numbers. One end is favoring a P helix, the other end is favoring an M helix, and they don't support each other, and so we get an uncontrolled helix instead. So, very interesting how the helicity is controlled by the end groups. I'm going to just run through to the end now because my time is limited. But what we've talked about is an assembly line synthesis, where you take a molecule and you add a blue reagent and then a red reagent, and these reagents control the stereochemistry, and the stereochemistry controls the overall shape of the molecule. And so with that, let me close and acknowledge our support. We've had good support from EPSRC, ERC, Bristol Chemical Synthesis Centre for Doctoral Training. I want to thank our collaborators, particularly Craig Butts. But the real heroes are the ones who've done all the chemistry, and here they are. I want to just spend a minute to single out one person, Jake Stymist. Jake started off this whole program of research in 2005 when he joined our group and took it to a really high level in the time that he spent with us. Rather tragically, Jake passed away at the beginning of this year, and so I want to dedicate this lecture to his memory. I want to thank the organisers once again for the invitation, and thank you all for your kind attention. Thank you.
Varinder, thank you very much for this very nice talk. I really enjoyed hearing the whole story. That was really nice to hear about this. We already received some questions on there.
Okay.
I particularly like very much that you showed how important the synthesis of a molecule still is to find its final and confirm its final stereochemistry and configurations on there. Let me start with the first question from the audience, and this is in the direction of the these resynthesis and confirmation of the stereochemistry of this natural product on there. And the question is rather specific. It goes, how do you compute the coupling constants and the NOEs for the different stereoisomers of these complex molecules? What technique are you using? And then, of course, the coupling constants due to conformational changes in the molecule depend also on solvent.
That's okay. That's a very complicated story, and basically,
is that a complex to?
Yes, indeed. Indeed. It's a complicated story. We basically start off doing molecular mechanics calculations. We get about 10,000 conformations of these open chain molecules. And we whittle this down. We then apply some DFT calculations. We get it down to about 100 low energy conformations that comprise 90% of the total landscape. And with 100 molecules, we can then do the calculation for each of those conformations, and then we Boltzmann weight those conformations and get the coupling constants and combine them all. It is a big job, actually, but with the computer programs that we use and the ones that have been developed by Craig Butts and others, it is accessible. Of course, cyclic molecules are much easier. The open chain ones are much more difficult, but it is possible to do that.
Right. What about the solvent? The influence of solvent on conformation and on coupling constant, physical constants?
Yes, I mean, I think we start off with gas phase, and then we introduce non-polar solvent, and that solvent is the solvent that we measure the NMR in. So we are always comparing what we make and measure with the computed structures in solvent.
Right. Okay. Mm-hmm. The story about the helicity changing by the length on there. This is, of course, a fantastic story on there. How is this seen in the context of the work from Jean-Marie Lehn and many others that create supramolecular helicity? And quite often you start off the helix and give it a twist, and then it prolongs through your chain.
Yeah.
Maybe
yeah.
you can put this in the context, because I was also surprised on the result on there, and so maybe you can put this in this context.
Yeah, you know, the structures that we make are much more fragile. The helicity is not complete. It's not as black and white as I indicated. It is about 80% of one helicity and 20% of the other form, because the energy difference between these two forms is not that high. When you compare it to the work of Jean-Marie Lehn and others, the helicity that you get there is much stronger because it's controlled by hydrogen bonding interactions. Ours is purely by steric interactions, and so it is indeed much more limited and more fragile. It isn't really helicity that you could use in a structural sense, but it is helicity that you can observe.
All right. So you have a more flexible, floppy structure, and
yes,
a little tweak
indeed.
is enough to change it. Okay,
yes,
now I
exactly. Exactly, yes.
Another question is coming in. You showed us how you can bring in the methyl groups and place them fantastically in your assembly line with the stereochemistry. What other functional groups are tolerated by your chemistry? So if I would plan a synthesis in the same way, but I don't need methyl groups, what other functional groups can I use and still get the great results that you have?
Yes, we have used methyl, ethyl. We've used longer chain molecules with an aromatic ring at one end. You can use isopropyl. So providing the chain doesn't have some reactive functional group that's not compatible with butyl lithium, you can use actually a very large variety of chains. It works pretty well, but I have to say, as the molecule gets more and more hindered, those couplings can begin to become less reliable because you form the adduct, and then the adduct can split apart again, because bringing two sterically encumbered components together is more challenging. But we've done some fairly hindered compounds, and they have worked reasonably well. And late stage combinations of functionalized compounds, we've done that. We showed that in the Ball-Meissen work, and we've done it in some other scenarios as well. So okay, it's pretty broad.
Okay, thanks a lot. Maybe I would like to ask Charlotte to join us here, if she has any questions from the other channels that we are using here to communicate with our audience. Hi.
Hello. So there are no questions on Twitter at this point. Right. So I guess we can answer another one from the attendee questions.
Sure. Right. Okay. There's one question I'm not fully understanding. Maybe you can follow up this later on in the chat. And so the question was, can we use silicon compounds in these reactions instead of carbon compounds? So it may either mean that you are transferring, so do the same trick you do with your lithiation borylation with carbon. Did you ever thought about using it with silicon?
Yes, indeed. And silicon provides you with another opportunity, because if you introduce silicon, then you can oxidize the silicon to an OH group, and so you can begin to make polypropionates this way. And indeed, we have done that. The issue with silicon, though, is that the anion that you generate from having silicon is not configurationally stable.
Right.
And so the way you get around that is to have an auxiliary on silicon, which then favors one diastereomer over the other. And in that way, you can introduce silicon with a very high level of selectivity. And so you can use this chemistry to make molecules with alternating silicon, methyl, silicon, methyl, and then at the end, oxidize the silicons to OH groups. So we've done that. We published it a couple of years ago, but tell you the truth, I don't think it is a solution to making polypropionates, because, you know, when we reflect on it, I would probably do some of the more modern aldol chemistry to make those. But if you've just got one or two OH groups in a molecule, and you want to do assembly line synthesis for its other features, it's a really nice way of doing it.
Great. Yeah. Thanks a lot. So it's possible, but it's a little more complex with the silicon. But it's nice that it has these different features in there.
Yes.
So looking at the clock, and in the interest of time, I think we have to close here. Please, to the audience, please continue. If you have further questions, write them into the into our chat here. And so Varinder will be able, the very few people I saw here that had problems connecting right in the beginning, the good news is everything is recorded, so you can also, you don't miss anything. You will see this later on. Varinder, thank you very much for sharing this beautiful chemistry with us. It was a pleasure, like always. Thank you very much. And with this, I would then give back to Anne to introduce our next speaker.
Okay. Thank you very much, Varinder, and thank you also very much, Burkhard. And now I would like to transition over to the next talk, and that's Tatiana Besset, and I would like to briefly introduce her. Hi, Tatiana. So Tatiana obtained her PhD at Grenoble University, and following on, she then did a postdoc in the group of Frank Glorius in Münster. She did a second postdoc with Joost Reek in Amsterdam, and then in 2012 she moved to Rouen, where she became a CNRS research or associate researcher. She's still in Rouen, and in 2018 she completed her habilitation there. Her research interests lie in the area of transition metal catalyzed CH activation reactions, and also in the development of new strategies in organofluorine chemistry. I'm very happy that Tatiana joined the international board of EurJOC as of this year, and she's always been very supportive of the journal, and it's my real pleasure that she's actually speaking here today, and she's telling us about her newest results in the partnership of fluorine chemistry and sulfur chemistry. So Tatiana, please go ahead with your talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you for this very nice introduction. I have to say that I'm very grateful for you, Burkhard and Charlotte, for giving me the opportunity to talk today. And this is my great pleasure to share with you part of our results related to sulfur and fluorine chemistry. So as you all know, the fluorine atom is a very special one, thanks to its unique features, such as its high electronegativity, its small size, the strength of the carbon-fluorine bond, and related to that, the key role of fluorinated groups on biomolecule activity. So I would like to share with you some numbers just to illustrate that. Up to 25% of pharmaceuticals and 40% of agrochemicals contain at least one fluorine atom. And on that slide, I choose to present you a few molecules which were approved by FDA in 2012, on which you can see a large diversity of fluorinated moiety, such as a simple fluorine atom, a CF3 group, or a CF2 moieties on aromatic, allylic, or aliphatic positions. In sharp contrast, less than 20 natural fluorinated molecules exist. So the only way to get access to this important class of compounds is to use organic synthesis as a tool, and this could explain the endeavor of the scientific community to look forward for the discovery of novel and efficient transformation toward this important class of compounds. Nevertheless, there are some persisting challenges in that field, and here I would like to highlight a few of them. Indeed, it's crucial now to keep going in the development of unprecedented and sustainable transformations, and also to design original reagents and to discover new fluorinated moieties. In particular, sulfur and fluorine already proved to be very good partners in organofluorine chemistry, and to illustrate that, you can see here a few fluorinated moieties like SCF3, SCF2H group, and SCF2 functional groups, which has been demonstrated very good and interested properties, and a lot of interest was shown towards the synthesis of molecules containing these fluorinated moieties. As a matter of example, you can see fipronil, which is used in a daily care for dogs and cats, for instance, and supplied by BASF. So in our group, we have been particularly interested in the design of new tools in organofluorine chemistry. On one side, we were aiming to develop a novel transformation, mainly based on organofluorine chemistry and CH bond functionalization. And on the other side, we are also focused on the design of new fluorine-containing reagents. So let's talk about the first part of my talk. Let's talk about that. So we wanted to develop new approach toward fluorinated molecules, and for that we wish to use a modern tool to access these compounds, merging organofluorine chemistry and CH bond activation. Indeed, as you all know, CH bond activation has been a very intense research field over the last years, as it affords step and anatomical processes from simple and non-prefunctionalized substrate, offering new retrosynthetic disconnections. So in particular, we were focusing on the SCF3 group. So why is that? The SCF3 group is an emergent fluorinated group because of its interesting features. And on the top right of the slide, you can see that the Angelo parameters of SCF3 containing molecules is higher than the one for a CF3 containing molecules, for instance, and it already shows high and good electron withdrawing character. Besides that, he already demonstrated its potential for the liberation of drugs and agrochemicals, and you can see on that slide, for instance, fipronil and totazuril, which were commercialized by BASF and Bayer respectively. But how could you make a carbon SCF3 bond? So traditional approaches are made on this three pathway, either fluorination of perchlorinated compounds or trifluoromethylation of sulfur-containing molecules, which imply, of course, to have the right sulfur at the proper position you want it to functionalize, or trifluoromethylation of a pre-functionalized complex. But what about the functionalization of a simple carbon-H bond? So with this in mind, we wanted to develop a general approach for the synthesis of trifluoromethylated molecules, and we turn our attention to the carbon sp2 SCF3 bond formation. So at first, we look at how could you make vinylic SCF3 containing molecules. So if you look at what has been developed over the years, key players in the field already reported various elegant methodology to get access to these compounds, starting either from boronic derivatives or halogenated or carboxylic ones. But as long as you are interested in the functionalization of a non-prefunctionalized substrate, you have to wait 2016 and the work of Glorious and Shen for the synthesis of the trifluoromethylated alkene from a non-prefunctionalized substrate. You can, of course, use other kinds of substrates, such as enamine derivatives or internal and terminal alkynes. But in the best case, you will get an access to the E isomer or to easy mixture of isomer, the E isomer being the major one. But what about having an access and selective access towards Z olefins? So to tackle the synthetic challenge, we envision that using a suitable directing group on olefin, we might coordinate to the palladium catalyst and then undergo the trifluoromethylated reaction, leading an access to the Z isomer. And indeed, using the amide derived from the 8-aminoquinoline, in the presence of the Munavali reagent 1 under palladium catalysis, under air at 80 degrees, we were able to get a selective access to the Z isomer. Hence, a panel of acrylamides were functionalized, and it turned out that the reaction was tolerant to oxygen and moisture, as well as we have an access to trisubstituted alkenes and even tetrasubstituted alkenes. You have to note that the yield were pretty good, considering that we are functionalizing a very versatile substrate. Only heteroaromatic pyridine derivative, for instance, were functionalized, although in quite moderate yield. And the main limitation of our methodology was the functionalization of aliphatic derivatives, such as olefin bearing a methyl at the alpha or alpha-beta position. We also conducted some mechanistic investigation to shed some light into the mechanistic knowledge and insight regarding this reaction, and we propose the following mechanism by coordination of the metal with the bidentate directing group, followed by the formation of this Palada cycle, which was reversible, and it turned out that this step was a rate-determining one, followed by an oxidative addition in the presence of the Munavadi reagent, which is playing here both the role of the source of the SCF3 and the oxidant, leading hence to this putative palladium-4 species, which after reductive elimination would lead to the expected compounds and regenerate the catalyst. So with this tool in hand, we were wondering, could we now functionalize over kind of carbon sp2 center, and basically could we functionalize arene derivatives? And the answer was yes, by just changing a little bit the directing group, so adding a methoxy group on that C5 position of the 8-aminoquinoline part, and increasing the temperature from 80 degrees to 120 degrees, we were able to get a panel of molecules, and this work was recently published in EurJOC. So to get a general approach toward trifluoromethyltiolated molecules, we then wanted to tackle the challenging carbon sp3 SCF3 bond formation, especially the functionalization of an activated primary carbon sp3 center. So when we started to work in 2014 on that project, there was only the work of Ching, who reported the trifluoromethyltiolation of benzylic position using a silver SCF3 source, so a nucleophilic source of SCF3. And then in 2015, Chen and Tong independently reported the trifluoromethyltiolation of secondary and tertiary centers. Then in 2016, Glorious showed that it was possible to combine organophotocatalysis and an electrophilic SCF3 source to get access to the trifluoromethylated molecules. But as long as you are interested in the functionalization of a primary carbon sp3 center, there was no method. And it turned out that using again this privileged directing group in the presence either of the Munavadi reagent or the Biard1 reagent 2, we were able, under palladium catalysis and mild reaction condition, only 70 degrees, to get the expected trifluoromethyltiolated molecule. And this approach was suitable for the functionalization of pivalic acid derivatives, but also alpha-alpha dimethylhydrocinamic compounds. And here you can see that we can get decent yield, taking into consideration the difficulty of the transformation, and no incorporation of the SCF3 group was observed either at the C5 position of the 8-aminoquinoline or at the benzylic position. Phenylacetic acid derivatives were also functionalized, as well as these compounds which do not have a significant torping effect, and we were getting the expected compounds in similar yields. Finally, with this, we had the chance to get analog of ibuprofen and naproxen with our methodology. So with these tools in hand, we were wondering, could we go further in that process? And by further means, we mean, could we undergo and find an efficient solution towards a remote trifluoromethyltiolation reaction? And indeed, our working hypothesis was the following one. We wanted to start from free alcohol and to get the expected trifluoromethyltiolated compounds. And for that, we got inspiration from the work of Zhu in 2018 and proposed the following pathways. So first, we can get this intermediate one, which under light irradiation would lead to this alkoxy radical, which after a 1,5-HAT process might lead to this radical, alkyl radical, which then might react with the SCF3 reagent. And indeed, it turned out that via two-step process, we can get access to this acetylated alcohol substituted at the gamma position with this SCF3 group. And the transformation was efficient on primary alcohol, either on secondary or tertiary center, as well as on secondary alcohol. So now I would like to switch to the second part of my talk, on which I would like to briefly introduce you the recent work we have done regarding the design of new fluorine-containing reagents. So as you might have noticed, in most of the cases, we need to use an electrophilic sources of fluorinated group to undergo our reaction, and especially we use, for instance, Burkhard reagents. So then we were wondering, could we find an efficient access to these NSCF3 molecules? So why is that? If you can change the nature of the air group on the aryl group, then you will have a library of electrophilic reagents which might be suitable to applied in different transformations. And besides that, these molecules are interesting compounds. Indeed, if you look at the Unch parameter, you can see that a molecule bearing an NSCF3 group has a higher Unch parameter compared to the one with SCF3 moiety. But how could you make a nitrogen SCF3 bond? Pioneered work by Brukovsky and Lieb showcased that you can use a chloro SCF3 or the SCF3 dimer, which are quite toxic and volatile. And then in 2008, there was a real breakthrough by Burkhard and Langlois, which reported that in the presence of DAS and TMSCF3, you can functionalize the corresponding aniline into the expated NSCF3 compounds. Then more recently, different research groups were focusing their and putting effort in the design of new methodology toward these NSCF3 molecules and developed several strategies using electrophilic SCF3 sources, like the work of Burkhard, who was using this reagent, Rupping, Chen, and Shibata. But what is worth to notice is you need to use these electrophilic sources to undergo the reaction, and these electrophilic sources need to be prepared in one or several steps from a nucleophilic sources. So, giving and having all these considerations in mind, we were wondering, could we get a more straightforward pathway, and could we start our synthesis of this NSCF3 containing molecule starting from silver SCF3? And indeed, we can use a nucleophilic sources of SCF3. If you use a suitable oxidant, then you might get this N-alloamine, which might undergo anionic metathesis towards the expated compounds. So with this approach, you might circumvent the use of electrophilic sources and the step to prepare them, and you have a one-pot process toward these NSCF3 derivatives, which could be a complementary pathway towards the existing method. And indeed, with this approach, we were able to functionalize a panel of primary aniline, as well as heterocyclic ones, such as 8-aminoquinoline or the 2-aminopyridine. Secondary aniline were also tolerated, even though you can see that when we use that substrate, the yield was a little bit lower, only 44% yield. And we were also pleased to see that we can extend the methodology towards the functionalization of alkylamines. And for instance, we can get an access to an analog of the tryptamine. And with this, we have a complementary approach toward the synthesis of the Burkhard-Langlois and Burkhard reagent. We, as mentioned previously, I told you that sulfur and fluorine are a good partnership, and in particular since 2016, there was a lot of interest toward this SCF2H and SCF2 functional group moiety, and a lot of development was noticed regarding indirect and direct methodologies to get access to these compounds. And one of the reasons is if you have a functional group on the fluorinated moiety, then you can modulate at will the properties of the molecule in which you incorporate this SCF2 functional group residue. So in particular, we were interested in the SCF2 phosphonate moiety. So traditionally, if you want to get access to molecules containing this SCF2 phosphonate, there were already several pathways based on electrocatalysis, Halex process, radical or anionic pathway. but the main limitation is a quite narrow scope, since only a methyl, phenyl, or pyridine derivative might be functionalized. So we wanted to develop a new reagent in which we can then have a panel of transformation and get a large library of SCF2 containing molecules. And inspired by what has been developed in the case of the SCF group, we thought about that reagent, which could be obtained from these NSCN derivatives itself prepared in one-pot process from a commercially available mesethyl aniline based on our in-home expertise. And indeed, via the in situ generation of a copper CF2 phosphonate, you can undergo a longer type nucleophilic substitution on the sulfur atom to get an access to this reagent in 71% yield, and you can even increase the scale of the reaction and get a large amount of this reagent. And then we were able to apply this reagent with various nucleophiles and functionalize acetophenone derivatives or beta-ketoester, for instance, as well as electron-rich heteroarenes such as indoles or phenol-type derivatives. And in that case, what was remarkable is we have a complete selectivity towards the formation of a carbon-sulfur bond, since we never observed any oxygen SCF2 phosphonate bond. We were also able to get an access to the challenging and symmetrical disulfide derivatives, and the reaction was working well with aromatic compounds or heteroaromatic ones, even with benzylic. But the main limitation here was no aliphatic derivative were suitable. Nevertheless, we were also pleased to see that the reaction was working with aniline derivatives, and we can get the expected compound in pretty good yields. Then, aiming at increasing the library of SCF2 containing molecules, we also investigated the reaction between this electrophic reagent with internal alkynes and alkene, and we can get either difunctionalized compounds, so namely olefin or aliphatic derivatives, or the SCF2 phosphonate alkyne. But as you have seen, we have some limitation in terms of scope, and especially we were wondering, could we have a reagent that might be suitable in radical transformations? And indeed, yes, from one we can get two, and indeed by just the treatment of this reagent free with the sodium paratoluene sulfinate, we can get an access to the reagent 4 in 81% yield, and we can even go to a 1 gram scale synthesis. And then with this reagent in hands, we were able to functionalize aldehyde derivatives and disulfide as well as thiol compounds, and in that case the reaction was also working with aliphatic derivatives. In case of aldehyde, we proposed the following mechanism. So when aldehyde were treated in presence of PFA and sodium azide, you can get the corresponding acyl radical, which then might react with the reagent towards the synthesis of the corresponding compound. And finally, I would like to share with you one of the last examples on which sulfur and fluorine were efficient, and in that case, not only to get SRF moiety onto the final molecule, but more as a reagent. Indeed, we have been interested in the OCHF methyl moiety, but moiety might be found, for instance, in glucose control agents. And generally, when you want to make this kind of molecule, there were already several pathways, either starting from this substrate after a bromination, fluorination reduction pathway, or a manganese catalyzed decarboxylation fluorination reaction, or the fluorination of ether molecules. But what about starting from simple alcohol, which is, as you all know, a very available and versatile class of compounds? So if you want to do so, you will have to design a CHF methyl reagent. And keeping this idea in mind, we thought that maybe we can prepare this sulfonium. And indeed, in 5-step synthesis, starting from thiophenol, we can get these expected compounds from first a chloromethylation reaction followed by a halogen exchange, then oxidation into the corresponding sulfur oxide and methylation, and a final step assisted with TF2O can lead to the sulfonium reagent as a mixture of diaster isomers. Nevertheless, we have an access on gram scale synthesis toward a bench table and air and moisture tolerant reagents. And with this enhance, we were able to functionalize a large panel of alcohol, like phenol derivatives, but also we can have an access to coumarin functionalize, to the functionalization, of coumarin. We were also able to get an access to an analog of riluzole, functionalization of amino acid derivatives, and even aliphatic alcohol were functionalized. We were also able to get access to S-CHF methyl and SO2 CHF methyl derivatives starting from thiol compounds. So with this, I would like to conclude. So I hope I convince you that sulfur and fluorine are good partnership in different way. Indeed, we were able hence to functionalize a large panel of molecules with the SCF3 group and get access either on SCF3 containing molecules on aromatic, aliphatic derivatives, but also we were able to synthesize a panel of fluorinated reagent and apply them in various functionalization of class of compounds. And with this, I would like to thank all the talented students who were working on that different project, all the members of the team, and also all the, and all the financial support, of course, all of you for your attention. And again, thanks again for the invitation. I'm still very pleased to be there. Thank you very much.
Tatiana, thank you very much for the very nice presentation and showing us what we can do with fluorine beyond just fluorine. No? So just with sulfur and other atoms, it's fascinating how this developed the whole field. We already got a few questions, and of course I encourage our attendees to post more questions on there. The first question, that's also something I wrote down, I would be interested in, and this is the stability of the compounds in general, because looking at the SCF3 group, if you bring this in, it looks also that could be a kind of a leaving group, it could be eliminated, and particularly if it's then bound to a heteroatom, like a nitrogen. How about the stability? What conditions these groups survive in the molecules? So
this is a very key point I would like to say, because, for instance, if you have a carbon SCF3 group, a carbon SCF3 bond, it's a very robust bond. And I showed you, for instance, the fipronil compounds on which you have this SOCF3 moiety on the molecules, and it turned out that this is so stable that now there is a lot of pollution. So people are trying to find solution, because since you can use it in the take care for if you want to take care of pets and cats, you are using this compound. So then there is so for instance in the region of Bordeaux, there are a lot of pollution based on these fluorinated molecules. So carbon SCF3 bond is pretty robust. For the N-SCF3 bond, I will be more cautious. I mean, the compound we got was stable, but I would have to say that it's much, much easier to break the bond. And for instance, as you can see, in the case of the Biard reagent or the phthalimide the Munavali reagent, in which you have the phthalimide core, I mean, we are using this as SCF3 sources. So it's really depending then on the structure of the molecules and on which condition you are using them.
All right. So the stability of the sulfur-nitrogen bond then is obviously less on there. But in general, these are molecules that withstand normal synthetic conditions and also applications, because this is, of course, possible for the metabolic stability of bioactive compounds.
Yes, definitely.
Right. Another question that came up was you showed that palladium is the metal of choice for these tethered C8 activation in there. Similar complexes and similar reactions can be done with copper. So did you try other metals? So copper, maybe even rhodium? No?
So we did try a lot of metals, but palladium was the best one in any cases. I mean, I would be very pleased that copper was working, to be honest. But unfortunately, I mean, palladium was giving us the best efficiency, and so far we have no really rationale behind to explain why palladium has such very specific behavior in our transformations.
Mm-hmm. And I have one question to the one very nice example you showed where you used the chemistry of Suo from Shanghai Tech, where you have these 1,5 hydrogen atom transfer on there. And I was not sure about the reagent. He uses typically a cerium complex and does a ligand to metal charge transfer. Was this the chemistry you applied also in to make these 1,5 hydrogen atom transfer?
No, we just use PIDA, and I'm not sure if I got your question, but we just use very simple conditions. So PIDA, blue light irradiation, and these electrophilic sources. The tollyl SO2 SCF3, which was very suitable in such kind of transformation.
All right. Okay. So it was just the analogy with this one. Good.
Yes.
Charlotte, any questions from other channels?
No, not at this point. I'm sorry.
No worries. There are more and more questions coming up here in the other attendee questions. I would like to kind of close our discussion with one more general question that came up here from our audience. And many bioactive compounds contain a halogen atom. Well, we see these now with the antiviral compounds coming up. And you introduce also with the CF3 or SCF3 group the halogens. Can you briefly comment to the broader audience? What is the kind of the specific importance when we make drugs, medications, bioactive compounds to include halogen atoms?
So I think to be more accurate in the answer I will provide you, I think I would talk mainly about fluorine atom, because the fluorine atom has a very specific behavior. And adding fluorinated groups has very crucial importance because it's known, for instance, to replace oxygen or sulfur, and then you have a non-hydrolyzable bond. So you can oxidize a CO bond, for instance, but you cannot do anything with a carbon-fluorine bond. So you definitely increase the metabolic stability of the molecules in which you add sulfur containing moieties. And besides that, by increasing the lipophilicity, you also increase the bioavailability of the drugs in which you incorporate this fluorinated moiety. But of course, each fluorinated group has very specific properties. So that's also, I would say, the chance we have working in organofluorine chemistry, because then you can really modulate the properties of the molecule in which you add this fluorinated moiety by just choosing them very carefully. But there are so many things to do and so many things that so far we still do not understand. So I'm looking forward for the next decades to see how much we can learn from all this fluorinated moiety, and especially the one containing sulfur.
Excellent. I think this is a very good statement to the end of your presentation and our discussion here, because in the interest of time, we have to move on here in the symposium. I fully agree that there is a lot to come in fluorine chemistry with all these variations, particularly also explored by your group. Excellent. Very nice. Thank you very much. I encourage our attendees to put more questions in there. Tatiana will be able to see the chat and answer and respond to questions if you put things on there. With this, we give back to Anne to present our third and last speaker.
Okay. Thank you very much, Burkhard, and also hello, Josep. Good to see you. So now we're looking forward to our last talk of this event, and that's Josep Cornellà from the MPI in Mülheim. So Josep studied at the University of Barcelona, and then for his PhD, he moved to the UK. And in 2012, he received his PhD in the group of Professor Igor Larossa. Following on, he did 2 postdocs. So he went to the ICIQ in Tarragona to join the group of Ruben Martin, and after that to Phil Barron at the Scripps Institute. Since 2012, he has been at the MPI in Mülheim, and he's currently a Max Planck research group leader. His research focuses on sustainable catalysis in organic synthesis, and here he's using earth-abundant and non-toxic elements. And I think his research on redox bismuth catalysis has gained a lot of attention in the last couple of years. He has published with us recently as part of our Young Talent Initiative, and this paper was really well received, and we're excited to have him here as our 3rd speaker for the symposium. And Josep, we very much look forward to your talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, and also I want to extend a thanks to Burkhard for this invitation to speak here. I am very honored to share the floor, or the computer, I guess, in these days, with these 2 amazing speakers. So this is probably the largest crowd I ever talked to, and yet I am sitting alone in my office. So it's something that I still I need to get used to. So today I would like to share a little bit with you what we have been doing in the lab since we opened the doors a couple of years and a half, almost 3 years now. Ago. So we are an organic synthesis lab, which we focus our attention in trying to develop practical methods to streamline, to generate short organic synthetic processes. But in this journey, we also look carefully at the fundamental reactivity to actually retrofit into this main goal, which is a streamlined organic synthesis. And to do that, our laboratory has a 3-fold approach. And I would like to talk to you today. In the interest of time, I will just give you a little bit of an idea of the first 2, and the last one, I will just mention it briefly at the very end. So we are focused on the development of reagents for organic synthesis, stoichiometric reagents that will enable transformations that would be rather difficult otherwise. And in the ligand design case, we just want to come up with ligands that would render new physical and chemical properties to metals. In this case, a transition metal of the first row, nickel. And I'll comment a little bit about it in the coming slides. So about the reagent design, so if one look at a variety of molecules that are drugs or fungicides or herbicides, there are about, one thing that catches the attention is the linkage between these the aromatic carbons and these heteroatoms, like carbon-nitrogen bonds, carbon-sulfur bonds, carbon-sulfone bonds, carbon-oxygen bonds. And coming from the transition metal catalysis, the immediate reaction that comes to mind is the Ullmann-Kupling reaction, the Bagwell-Harwick reaction, and derivatives thereof. But if one talks to the industry people to make these linkages, if it's possible to make it because the position is activated enough, they would probably go for an SNAR reaction, a nucleophilic aromatic substitution, because it's reliable, not because the other ones are not, but these ones are reliable, are scalable, and are really robust and basically work. But the starting material that you require is this imidyl chloride that you prepare from the Beelsmeyer reagent with the Beelsmeyer reaction from the parent amide. And these guys can be susceptible to moisture, hydrolytically unstable, therefore, and they are basically not present in nature. You have to make them. So the idea that we came when we started here was, what about the replacement of those chlorides, those acyl chlorides, masked acyl chlorides, for these aminopyridines? Well, if that reaction is basically unfeasible, and we all learn that in organic chemistry, because there is a huge drawback, and it's that the NH2 is not a good Lipin group, right? But if you imagine for a second that this reaction is possible, so that would be really, really interesting and really cool, right? And really advantageous, because there are plenty of structures in nature that contain this moiety. They are part of your DNA or your vitamins. Many drugs contain these carbon-nitrogen, these amino groups, the amino functionalities, and then that would generate a really good handle for maybe late-stage functionalization in these positions, if we can get a methodology that tolerates all these functionalities. So if one wants to modify these amino groups and add a nucleophile into it, the first thing that comes to mind is probably the diazonization reaction, convert that into the diazonium salt. But for example, for this particular case, adenosine, I would argue that you have quite an unstable intermediate with 6 nitrogen atoms and probably very thermally unstable, and you would probably need the protection of the triol, and you require very oxidizing conditions. So another alternative that you have is the polyalkylation of that nitrogen to make it a good living group. But if you add an excess of alkylating agent, there are Lewis basic sites there that will probably get alkylated prior to that very weakly nucleophilic nitrogen on the amine, on the aromatic amino cycle. So the inspiration really came when we looked at the synthesis of DMAP, an early synthesis of DMAP, which corresponds basically to the oxidative dimerization of pyridine with Socal-2 or chlorine gas to get to this pyridinium chloride and pyridine chloride starting material, protonated there. And then if you throw dimethylamine into this pyridinium, you get DMAP out, and you recover some of your starting material that you can recycle. And this chemistry is really not new, or is very old, and is quite very well known, that you can take these pyridine dimers, this pyridinium, bispyridinium adducts, and throw in, cook it with a phenol or with an amine or even with a sulfur source or water, and you will displace this pyridinium and make the corresponding carbon heteroatom bond. So the idea then was very obvious here now. So could we come up with a reagent that would selectively wrap around these amino groups, generate these similar intermediates, the pyridinium salts that hopefully, according to the literature, are air stable and bench stable and so on. And then capitalize on all that chemistry from 1930s, 1950s, and then do SNAR type of chemistry. Well, so what we did is starting from pyridinium sulfur trioxide in a 2-step ring opening, ring closing event, we generate this pyridinium tetrafluoroborate that we call PBF4. This is a bench stable solid. We can prepare it in multigram scale, and it's readily available, as I said, from this Parik-Doring oxidation reagent here, which is quite cheap. So with that pyridinium tetrafluoroborate in hand, basically what was left to do is to try the hypothesis. So you take 4-aminopyridine, you throw in your pyridinium BF4 that wraps around, generates a pyridinium intermediate, and to that pyridinium intermediate, either isolating it or by crashing it out from the solution in ethanol, or in situ by evaporating ethanol, you just throw in your aniline, your nucleophile, you protonate a little bit the pyridine with HCl and dioxane, heat up, and what you get is very good yields of the carbon-nitrogen bond here. And this chemistry is a little bit, is robust, and it doesn't care too much about the solvent unless it's THF for some reason that we still not fully understand. But all the other solvents that we tried in the second step of the reaction, they all work pretty nicely. It's also worth mentioning that this the Katritsky salts of the corresponding aminopyridine did not lead to any of the product, and we suspect that the blocking of the positions 2 and 6 impede the nucleophile, the nucleophilicity, to the attack at the ipso position, or also at the 2 position of the pyridine to ring open, if that is also another operating mechanism for this transformation. So with that, basically what we did is explore a little bit the scope. And as you can see, there are this first example of this complex amide. I think is quite interesting because copper chemistry here would generate probably problematic by chelating this diamino compound here. So benzothiazoles are amenable. Also aryl alkyl anilines, such as this third example here. You can get this carbon-nitrogen bond in good yields. So you can also extend to carbon-sulfur or carbon-sulfone if you start from either from the thiol or the sodium sulfinate salt in good yields. And you can also move, you require a little bit more temperature, 130 degrees, 150, but you can also take a phenol, the pyridinium salt, mix it together, heat it up, and you get this diaryl ether bond. So it's so selective. It targets amino groups. This pyridinium is so selective for amino groups that we started considering going into what functionalities we can tolerate. Can we go to late stage, as I mentioned in the introduction? So as you can see here, for example, an anti-cancer like ibrutinib or prazosin, these two drugs reacted very well with the beryllium, and they afforded, I would say, good yields for a medicinal chemist that is working on this project that wants to substitute at that position these drugs. And you can see how many functionalities can go wrong here if you use some transition metal catalysis reaction. But as I said at the beginning, this is probably my favorite example, because if you want to get this adenosine modified, you would have to start from inosine, protect the triol, then POCl3, this intermediate here, so the Buchs-Meyer reaction, throw your nucleophile in, deprotect, so overall 4 steps. And with this, you can start from the DNA building material adenosine, condense it with the reagent, the beryllium BF4, throw in your nucleophile after the reaction is, after the condensation is finished, and then you get 71% in one pot of this carbon-sulfur bond here. So that was really interesting, and we wanted to explore a little bit more what can you do with this beryllium reagent. And we had a look at sulfonamide bonds, and probably to this audience is needless to say how important it is to make sulfonamide bonds for the chemical industry, for the medicinal, pharmaceutical industry, and for crop science. So the point here was more like looking at the sulfonamide instead of the complex sulfonamides, looking at the simple sulfonamides, because these have been one of the earliest antibiotics that was known. And then there are, in the pharma libraries, there are plenty of scaffolds that contain this primary sulfonamide. And therefore, there are many, many, many groups attached to these primary sulfonamides, because the target of those programs was to make these primary sulfonamides. So there are thousands of compounds in the chemical industry of these primary sulfonamides. And the question was, can we repurpose those primary sulfonamides to actually make sulfonamide bonds that are of higher order of complexity? So basically using primary sulfonamides as electrophilic linchpin reagents. Can we turn them into linchpin electrophilic sulfur reagents? And I would like to point out this work from Patrick Fear at Merck that actually was looking in a similar approach, but turning sulfonamides into sulfinate salts and rendering these sulfonamides as nucleophilic partners. So our idea was to take these complex sulfonamides, as I said, turning it into electrophiles, and by just mixing with this reagent, the beryllium reagent, a little bit of magnesium chloride, what we converted these complex sulfonamides is into one of the best electrophilic electrophiles in organic synthesis, which is basically the sulfonyl chloride. And then in situ, once you form the sulfonyl chloride, you don't need to isolate if you don't want to, and you just throw your coupling partner, your amine, your ester, your alcohol, whatever you think that would work with a simple sulfonyl chloride. And you just get this higher order of complexity sulfonamides. So another thing that we looked at is an obvious question that comes to your mind. If you can make sulfonyl chlorides, can you make even more interesting compounds like sulfonyl fluorides? Well, so if you add a little bit of KF in the reaction, basically you form the sulfonyl chloride, and in situ, once you add water, this KF will do an exchange, an halogen exchange, and generate the corresponding sulfonyl fluoride. And here you see that quite complex sulfonyl fluorides can be made by this simple procedure, which is quite robust. And you can see how many functional groups we can tolerate in here in pretty good yields in, let's say, 2 steps. And this was published in EurJOC. So thanks to the organizers of the symposium. I guess this is the article that you were referring at the beginning. So as I said, sulfonyl fluorides, of course, they are like very important, as Sharpless has already demonstrated as activity-based probes in suffix chemistry. Also John Moses and many others have been looking at them. So this is beryllium tetrafluoroborate, and hopefully it will become available soon so people can go buy it and try reactions. I'll be very happy to see where this beryllium tetrafluoroborate can go and see how many things can it activate. So that is how we think about the reagent design that I mentioned at the very beginning. Is one of the 3 pillars of our research program. And I would like to focus in the last part of the talk into this ligand design and how we came up with a new nickel catalyst. So the whole story started by looking at, this is an interesting story because it starts by looking at a very fundamental question with no practicality whatsoever. And then it turned out into a very interesting story that we did not expect or it could not be envisaged at the very onset of this program. So what we came across is this beast here, this nickel, highly reduced nickel bis lithium complex, and this complex was synthesized here at the Max Planck, where I am, in 1975 by Klaus Jonas and Richard Portke, Professor Portke, and it was sitting around for many years. And when I came across this catalyst, I thought that it has to be useful for something. And it turns out to be catalytically active at very, very low temperatures for the cross-coupling, for a Kumada cross-coupling between an aryl halide or a vinyl halide and an alkyl grignard. So here's the crystal structure of this interesting compound. You can see the two lithiums in purple that are trans to each other in a trigonal bipyramid geometry in which three olefins are coordinated to the nickel, and the last olefin of the COD is actually hanging out because there is no more, you already saturated the nickel center. So this reaction, I don't want to go into detail, but it can react with a variety of vinyl bromides, and it orthogonal reactivity. It shows orthogonal reactivity to the traditional Kumada catalysts at these temperatures, in which complex 1 is much more active. For example, in the case of this tosylate here in the third row, or in an ester, we are lowering down so much the temperature that the competing attack of the Grignard into the ester is not happening, and therefore we can get selective cross-coupling onto the vinyl bromide. But the interesting thing came when we looked at the mechanism of this transformation. And what happened was that it turns out that this catalyst is just a simple pre-catalyst, that what it generates in situ is tris nickel zero olefin complexes. But I don't want to go into the detail of the mechanism. What I would like to tell you is that tris olefin nickel zero complexes are super, 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 super sensitive. And these are three examples of this complex. For example, the all trans nickel CDT, the second one, the all cis nickel CDT, or the nickel norbornene 3. So these complexes are temperature unstable. They are air unstable. They basically, if you touch the grease, you generate nickel black, which at the same time it will catalyze the formation of more nickel black. So they are highly unstable at higher temperatures because of this 16 electron configuration. Nickel cod, on the other hand, is much more stable, but even though it's the more stable than the other ones, you still have to keep it under argon and in the freezer of the glove box, right? Because it's also temperature. Over time, it will also decompose. So Lucas, the postdoc that was working on this, an excellent PhD student, realized about, so this is what I wanted to say, so highly sensitive to air, right? So highly sensitive to temperature. Basically, you need to store it under argon or under dry ice. Otherwise, you will most certainly get nickel black. So what he did was to started synthesizing when he realized that it was a tris olefin nickel zero complex, the active species, he started synthesizing some tris olefin nickel catalysts beyond these three that I showed at the top right. So when he used the Stilbin derivatives here, a surprising thing happened. So he made the 16 electron complex, as I showed here on the right after the arrow, by mixing trans nickel CDT with a Stilbin with 3 equivalents or almost 3 equivalents, and he gets this 16 electron complex. But the interesting thing happened when he used a para CF3 substituted as Stilbin. So he got 70% of this 16 electron complex, but what happened was that this 16 electron complex turned out to be air stable. So this is 16, I want to emphasize this, is a 16 electron nickel zero air stable, which is quite surprising for the people that work with nickel chemistry, know how difficult it is to stabilize the nickel zero oxidation state. But nickel zero olefin complexes, so if you compare into the X-ray here, it has these twisted, so it has, it's not planar, the 3 olefins are not in the plane and they are slightly twisted in the same way than all trans nickel CDT. So here is the X-ray on the left, on the top view in the middle, and then the field space in the mercury, a simple program, but it looks like that these Stilbins are arranged in a way that looks like a little bit like calyx rings, and then they are protecting the nickel center from oxidation in the solid state. So the distance between, this is the core, which I highlighted, of this twisted geometry that I already told you about, the nickel center with the olefins. And the distance here is comparable to the all-trans nickel CDT. So 1.37 to 1.39. And also the bond length between the two olefinic carbon, the angle of this torsion is also pretty similar, 32 degrees to 29 degrees. And what is important here is that nickel CDT is very, very good at exchanging ligands when you face it to a phosphine, to an NHC, to a diamine, or to an amine. So we wondered, how would this catalyst that we just made, this complex that we just made, behave in all those reactions that use nickel zero, and they require a ligand to exchange? For example, a Suzuki cross-coupling that uses DPPF, the catalyst, the nickel fluorostilbene 3, performs equally well than the DPPF nickel cinnamyl 2. But with that, you can actually go on and start looking in the literature and take all those reactions that you could now do with nickel cut, bring them into the benchtop, don't need to go to the glove box. Basically take this complex and replace it and use it instead of nickel COD. And we are working in trying to improve this and provide even more reactions that this catalyst can do, but it's fairly large what this catalyst can cover as a replacement for nickel COD. But one interesting feature is also if we can provide an extra turn into this chemistry here. So can we do something that actually nickel cut is not able to do? And that would provide something, that would really bring something to the table for this catalyst. So for example, if one look at the CH activation by nickel, that usually is, that it usually requires these NHC carbines, one of the drawbacks or problematics that have been encountered in the literature when you use COD ligands is that after the CH insertion or the ligand-to-ligand hydrogen transfer, this basically hydrometallates into the double bond. It takes the double bond of the COD and it hydrometallates into that bond. And after a little bit of chain walking, you get to this last complex here, which is a dead end and is a deactivation pathway when you use COD as ligand. So then we wondered, we don't have a COD ligand, right, in the system. So maybe we can provide some nickel zero that we don't have to premix and then make this reaction happen. So with nickel COD, for example, this alkylation of pentafluorobenzene here, it would give 8% yield. And if you use the nickel fluorostilbene, now you can recover the reactivity because this hydrometallation side pathway is not occurring into the trifluorostilbene, bis trifluorostilbene. And that generates this plus of extra reactivity compared to nickel COD by having a slightly electron withdrawing stilbene ligand. So we also developed, you don't have to start from nickel CDT. We were aware that if you have to make nickel CDT to make this catalyst, then nobody's going to use it. So we just developed a very simple protocol of basically taking nickel ACAC, you mix it with your stilbene triethyl aluminum at minus 20 degrees, and you get more than 20. I think we tried 100 was the last time that we tried, and it's still very high yields, 100 grams scale in one single run, just simple filtration, and you get the catalyst pure. So here is a picture of this catalyst. It's a nice, very nice red compound, and we can use it in a variety of cross couplings, as I already showed in the previous slide. So this is basically what I wanted to share with you today about how we think of organic synthesis from the point of view of the reagent design, from the point of view of of designing ligands or thinking of ligands that would change the physical properties to make advantageous and much more practical some reactions that are already available. And the last 2 minutes or so that I have, I would like to talk, not much, but just briefly give you a few notes on how we think about the catalyst design. So this is the area that Anne already referred to, which is the bismuth chemistry, how we thought about bismuth chemistry. So our idea when we started this project was to think about why transition metals are so dominant in so many aspects of catalysis. And what I came up with is that basically, so what we can think of, one of the best properties is that they can modify the oxidation state within the catalytic cycle. Basically, they are producing catalytic redox processes in which the transition state gets oxidized and then it gets reduced during productive catalysis. So our initial idea, which was very naive and very challenging, is can we think of a bismuth as a redox catalyst? So could we take a bismuth at a given oxidation state, oxidize it in a catalytic fashion, and then reduce it again? This would be the simplest catalytic cycle in which you oxidize one and you reduce once. So the way we thought about this problem, which as I want to emphasize that this is very challenging to do, and many people have been looking at comparing redox properties to main group elements. So we divided this into two separate manifolds. The low valent manifold, in which a bismuth 1 would revolve between bismuth 1 and bismuth 3 in the catalytic cycle, and the bismuth 3, bismuth 5, which would be the high valent bismuth catalysis. So I don't want to get into much detail because this is a very long story, and in the interest of time, I don't have time to explain everything, but I want to say that we think we achieved both catalysis here. So for example, for the low valent, we have reported last year this bismuth 1 complex bearing an NCN developed by Libor Dostal in 2010, a monomeric bismuth 1. And if you take this in a transfer hydrogenation, it basically repulses between bismuth 1 and bismuth 3 and grabs the hydrogens from the ammonia porine and puts it into azobenzene or nitrobenzene to get hydroxylamines. So on the other hand, what we also achieved in the high valent part was, for example, a reaction that transition metals have a very hard time to do catalytically. So you'd convert a boronic acid or a boronic ester into an aryl fluoride by means of bismuth catalysis. So we designed this bismutidine bearing this sulfoximine NCF3 here, featuring this NCF3 bond here. And this bismine is the actual catalyst that transmetallites, undergoes oxidative addition into a high valent fluorinating reagent. And from the bismuth 5, you get a reductive elimination or ligand coupling. Depends on the nomenclature. You get the aryl fluoride and you recover your catalyst. And we've gone beyond, because these transition metals can do it stoichiometrically, but we were wondering, can we actually come up with a reaction that not even transition metals stoichiometrically can do? And this was something very challenging to find, but we came up with this reaction, which is synthetically probably not very useful, because you could just oxidize a boronic acid and convert it into a phenol and then triflate it. But it's fundamentally very interesting. You convert an aryl boronic acid into an aryl triflate by means of coupling a sodium triflate or a sodium nonaflate. So it's basically a sort of oxidative, so a catalytic Chan-Lam between sodium triflate, which is usually in transition, if you think of transition metal chemistry, the triflates are usually the anions that you use to put in the outer sphere to generate vacant sites. And in here, when you use bismuth, bismuth is so oxophilic that it just grabs these triflates into the coordination sphere and undergoes this CO bond formation. And this has been recently published, but unfortunately, in the interest of time, I don't have time to talk about it. But I just want to briefly mention that we are also actively working in this area of bismuth redox catalysis. So with that, I just want to conclude and say that so the way we approach, I hope I convince you that our threefold approach is probably is leading somewhere in providing opportunities for organic synthesis, either by using stoichiometric reagents that enable challenging transformations, or designing catalysts that make life much easier in the lab. You don't have to use Schlein techniques for nickel cut chemistry anymore, and you can just weigh out your catalyst in the open to air. And then last but not least, probably a very important point is the fundamental reactivity of bismuth that enabled us to unfold this until, to the best of our knowledge, unknown 3,5 and 1,3 redox cycle for this heavy element. And so with that, I just want to thank the group. These are the two heroes. So Lucas, the first guy on the top left, is the one behind on all this nickel chemistry. He was being joined with many people, but he has been one of my first PhD students. So really thankful for all his insights into this nickel air stable. And then Feng, the second guy, and Uri have been behind all the bismuth chemistry, developing a lot of these redox catalysis. And I just want to thank past members on the beryllium chemistry, Yaya and Daniel, and now Alejandro has taken over, and together with Clement, and we are developing many more transformations involving this activation of amino groups with a beryllium reagent. So last but not least, important is the funding that enabled to pay the bills and all this research to make it possible. And then finally, I would like to thank Professor Fusner for believing in some of these stories at the very early stages when nothing was, basically, it was all proposed. So he believed a little bit on what was going on, and then I'm thankful for everyone at the MPI for their support. And thank you for your attention. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Josep, thank you very much for this very nice talk, very instructive and very clear, the different three approaches. We got many questions. Let's see, we have to select a few ones and you later on have to follow up on all these questions. Let me start with one thing that may, for the first part, where you activate the amine with the beryllium salt on there, and then you have your, you showed that you can very nicely use this to do then nucleophilic aromatic substitution, and you replace the amine by other functional groups on there. What about the competition to attack in the ortho position of the pyridinium salt? I even remember there's even a name reaction. The pyridinium salts, you open them to dicarbonyls on there. So how is this competition? Is this occurring? Is this part of this? Just comment on this, please.
So I think so it's formally an nucleophilic aromatic substitution. The most electrophilic position, I guess, is the 2 and 4 and 6 positions. So all that is usually in equilibrium, and I think the nucleophile attacks the 4. And then it opens up maybe, but it eventually grabs the ipso position because it's also electrophilic, and that generates pyridine, which is also a good driving force for and the new carbon-nitrogen bond that will not go anywhere anymore. So we know that we ring open this beryllium. So we don't do basically the nucleophile attacks the ipso position and pyridine goes out. So you attack the 2 position, and then there are a certain amount of equilibriums at this temperature in which basically everything goes down to the carbon-nitrogen bond and the formation of pyridine out. So that is for the aminopyridines case in which we isolate the pyridinium intermediate, because we cannot mix everything together, right? Because otherwise our anilines would condensate with the beryllium and so on. But in the case of the sulfonamides, for example, when we mix the sulfonamide with a beryllium reagent, we open it in the first stages, but I am not convinced that I don't think we form basically the beryllium with a sulfonyl. Right? It just stays open. And then the magnesium chloride, I believe that it chelates somehow there, and then it delivers the chloride and kicks out the pyridine again. But we never see 100% conversion of the pyridine leaving. We always see some polymeric coming from the glutathione, right? And all this. So, yeah, I think it activates, it condensates nicely the first time, but then the cyclization, depending on the substrate, happens, depending on the substrate does not happen. And also the additive, obviously, that you put in there.
Yeah, like so often, chemistry is more complex when you look a bit more into the details of the mechanisms on there. Right. One other specific question, when you transform the sulfonamides to sulfonyl chlorides, you use a magnesium chloride. Why magnesium? Why not sodium or anything else? Has the magnesium a special role?
So as I was saying, I think you need some sort of chelating counterion onto the chloride to grab this leaving group and, to force somehow what happens. So we are not sure what's the mechanism really. Magnesium chloride is the one that turned out to work best. I mean, sometimes this is what it is. We tried lithium chloride. We tried many counterion metal chlorides or M chlorides, right? And these magnesium chloride turn out to be like super good solubility-wise with the solvent that we are using. And also, I think it's also some chelation effect that you need from the oxygen, or from the oxygen that you open and the nitrogen. So we have to bring them together somehow, and then the chloride kicks in, and there is some sort of driving force, which is the formation either pyridine or the glutathione, but coordinated to the magnesium, and that probably grabs it and helps it to drive it down. And probably lithium or sodium would not do that with a nitrogen atom. So, but that is pure speculation. We have not much evidence for all this.
Right, this is where it starts, right. Another question is regarding the other derivatives than sulfonamides. Recently, some other groups, these sulfonimidiamides, for example, and other derivatives have played an increasing role in pharmaceutical chemistry because they are quite nice groups, have a good polar lipophilic balance, and many people work that, for example, here the group of Carsten Bohm has developed methods and many others. So did you expand your methods to these kind of derivatives? Because they are also chiral, and that's the second part of the question. Do you get racemization when you would activate with your method a chiral sulfonimidamide for substitution on there? Did you try this, or is it still?
Yeah, so we have not tried it at all, right? We have not tried it. Yeah, so I think there has to be also a balance on how difficult it is to make the functional group of a sulfonamide and destroy it, the amino group. I guess that yeah, I am not like, I don't have all the literature in my head on how to make the amino sulfonamides, sulfonimidates. Yeah. But I don't know if putting this NH2 here is more like you can already bring the amine that you want at some point, and you don't have to go through the sulfonamide and then kick out the beryllium, the pyridine and so on. In the case of sulfonamides, they are very stable and there are plenty of them, and that's why that was one of the driving forces. Otherwise, what you're doing is the reverse of what you would usually do, which is taking a sulfonyl chloride and convert it into a sulfonamide. But the idea here was that there were so many sulfonamides, primary sulfonamides available in pharma libraries that just repurposed that to convert it into a. So I don't know how large is the chemical library of these other compounds. But then the second part of the question, we've never tried, so I don't know if we racemize the sulfur or we invert the configuration. I don't know.
There was also interest, and this of course relates to the previous talk on there. What about fluorinations? At a hetero, let's say you have a heteroaromatic compound that has an amino group. Can you convert it with your method into a fluorine substituent?
Yeah, not yet. So that is another thing, right? I mean, we are trying to, because there are limitations on this, many limitations, and it's the fact that the beryllium is what you mentioned. Aniline is the only substrate that would probably allow the attack in the position 2 and everything be reversible until you form the carbon-nitrogen bond. But if you take a secondary amine, for some reason, the yields are very bad. And for the DMAP synthesis, this worked fine because it's all good and you recycle your material and you keep going. But for this late stage, a secondary, like morpholine, we cannot make the carbon-morpholine bond, because it attacks the 2 position and it opens up and makes the zinc reaction, and that's it. And it's game over. So what we are trying to do is to convert these amino groups into a living group, like a chloride. And then you are in situ, you have in the same way that we made the sulfonyl chlorides, you make the acyl chlorides, right, or the iminyl chlorides, and then you just throw your nucleophile, and then you expand the nucleophiles that you can get there. But that turned out to be difficult.
Yeah. And there were several questions regarding the nickel complex, and one of them is because this has very peculiar properties, your nickel complex. So is the electron density at nickel related to other nickel zero complexes? Did you look into this from your crystal structures? Or what is so special with this complex that it's reactive but still stable? And also for ligand exchange, there was a question if this is it easy to exchange the ligands, or you need higher temperatures to activate it?
Okay, so those are many observations. So that the first one would be, so I'm going to start from the end. So like the para CF3, so you can exchange. The question is how many ligands do you want to exchange? So the first stilbene will go away, the second one will go away easily, but then it becomes stable, for example. Like you have a bidentate phosphine or a bidentate amine with a nickel 0, and then you will have a stilbene complex. So if you have reactions in which this is affecting the rate determining step, then you will have to heat up more, because the lability of this nickel stilbene, so the nickel stilbene the bond is more stronger than the nickel COD with the same ligand. And sometimes reactions in which this is important, we need an extra boost of thermal energy. So we need from 80 degrees, for example, in a Aggarwal-Harwick to go up to 100. Another reaction, I think we had to go from 110 to 130 or so. So there are certain reactions in which this is a problem yet at the moment. But we have now something else that basically mimics completely. You don't have to care about this anymore with the second generation sort of catalyst that will come out that will solve all these problems. So the first question was if it's the properties relate to other nickel olefin complexes that are out there. So basically the electron density on the nickel is a nickel 0. We've done some XPS on these complexes, and it's a nickel 0. And it matches with the nickel COD and the nickel CVT. So in that sense, is a nickel 0 for sure.
Okay. Great. Yeah, thanks a lot. I think for the bismuth, I think you have to give another talk then at a different occasion, because there are also some questions coming in. I don't see questions on the Twitter channel, Urgent One. Is it correct? Charlotte, yeah, okay. So,
yeah, that's correct.
Okay, good. But here in the attendee channel, there are so many other questions. So Josep, this will keep you busy for another hour to answer all of them. Yeah. And Josep will do this. But I would like to come closer to an end, because we are already online for 2 hours and broadcasting for 2 hours. Thank you very much for this very nice talk and also the discussion. Fantastic chemistry.
Thanks.
To all our audience, all the remaining questions will be answered by our speakers. They will stay online. And I think the chat will also stay open for a while. Leaves me to thank our speakers for sharing the fantastic chemistry here with us, with the audience. Very nice. And also our attendees for joining us. So to share good chemistry in these times where we cannot travel so much. Everything has been recorded, and there's a possibility to also later on view in. And I hope I see you again at the next occasion. Tune in again when we have another virtual symposium on there. And don't forget to send good scientific work to the European Journal of Organic Chemistry or any of the other journals of Chemistry Europe. So, bye-bye, and see you then.
Thank you very much, Burkhard. I think I'll just give a few short concluding remarks. And yeah, first of all, I would like to thank the speakers. I think this was a fantastic edition. So thank you, Tatiana and Josep, and also Varinder for taking the time to present your work. And also thank you to our viewers. The response has been overwhelming. Again, we have really a lot of registrations and participants, and they were active in the chat. And there was also a lot of stuff happening on Twitter. No questions, but people were commenting on the symposium. So that was really nice. And as Burkhard said, there is a recording available. We will post the link as soon as possible. And when we started the symposium series, we didn't really know where this was going. And I'm happy that we're now already hosting the third event, and I'm sure there's a fourth one coming up. So please stay tuned for that. And I'm also happy to let you know that our sister journals are hosting events as well. And for example, Chem Biochem has already had a symposium, and the second one is happening next week. So if you have time, please also tune in for that. Registration is free and only takes a few clicks. And also a few of our other journals are coming out with symposia soon. So stay tuned for that. And yeah, with this, I want to thank everyone again. And yeah, hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Mm-hmm.